Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and we are gathering to talk about Ubisoft again. There is more bad news. This time, the team behind Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, one of the best reviewed Ubisoft games in recent years, has been disbanded and spread across 3 projects. So important to note, not laid off, just dispersed to other projects. So we're going to get into that, what they're working on, and the effect this will have on Ubisoft. Like I've said in many Ubisoft videos now, when it rains, it pours. But ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I want to shout out a very close friend of mine in Jimmy Champagne, who just launched his brand new channel, Real Ones. It's a channel he's wanted to do for over a decade now. And Jimmy is like the go-to guy when it comes to horror. And this channel is dedicated to stories that you've just like never heard about when it comes to these movies. Like how John Carpenter does not fondly reflect on his career like many other people do, and how he thinks his billion-dollar franchise is kind of a failure. Like there's a lot of stories in these videos that he shows off that I think are really good, really interesting. And he's been sending me drafts and updates as he's built this channel. And as someone who's launched a number of channels myself, I absolutely want to help him out. So that'll be linked down below. Please check it out. Jimmy has launched a number of channels alongside me in Retro Rebound and Retro Rewind. He's always had my back. I hope y'all will have his back, especially in the spooky time month here. If you're into horror stuff, please check him out. Link down below. Be sure to sub up my boy. With that though, let's begin with talking about Ubisoft, because again, the news here is fascinating. At first, this broke out from a French YouTube channel called Origami.
Wait, what the fuck is this? Is this French? I can't fucking read French.
I'm definitely at the mercy of people translating this and maybe even using Google Translate or something like that. But nonetheless, the report first broke out there that the Ubisoft Montpellier team had been broken up and dispersed throughout Ubisoft to other projects. And now it seems we do have official confirmation through Eurogamer, who writes, Ubisoft responds to report Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown development team disbanded. In a statement to Eurogamer, the Assassin's Creed publisher largely confirmed what had been reported, though made clear the game's team were still present and busy at development studio Ubisoft Montpellier, albeit now on other projects that'll benefit from their expertise. Yesterday's report by Origami was not fully clear on the status of the team behind The Lost Crown, which received a positive critical response upon its launch this year, though failed to set tills ringing. The report also suggested The Lost Crown would not receive a sequel as a result of its commercial performance, something Ubisoft does not contradict today, with ideas for a follow-up reportedly merged into plans for the game's DLC. Here is the official comment. I'm extremely proud of our team's work and passion at Ubisoft Montpellier to create a game that resonated with players and critics alike, and I am confident in its long-term success, Abdelak Elges, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown senior producer, said in a statement to Eurogamer. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is now at the end of its post-launch roadmap with 3 free content updates and 1 DLC that released in September. We are now focused on making the game available to more players. It was recently launched on Steam and will be available on Mac by this winter. Most of the team members who worked on Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown have shifted to other projects that'll benefit from their expertise. We know players have a love for this brand, and Ubisoft is excited to bring more Prince of Persia experiences in the future. We'll also talk about that. But yeah, they've moved on to 3 other projects. What those are, we'll get into from Insider Gaming in just a moment here. But this is really sad to see, because I also reviewed Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It was the first game I reviewed at the top of this year over on Retro Rebound. And we talked about just how great the game was. It was a really, really good Metroidvania title, surprisingly competent, and in a weird way, returning to the roots of what made Prince of Persia Prince of Persia. It started off as a 2D franchise, and granted, it got its legs and its popularity when Ubisoft started to build Prince of Persia in a 3D space on PS2 with Sands of Time and so on, but it really did return the series to its roots. And I think the moral of the story here is 2 things. Number 1 is that unfortunately, even if you review really well, it doesn't mean it's going to result in a lot of sales. Number 2, Ubisoft's expectations for this game were, I think, unfair and unrealistic. Emphasis on unrealistic. We'll talk about that in a moment. And number 3 is I do think there's an overestimation on how much power right now the Prince of Persia brand has. This project, as we'll read in a moment, was greenlit in 2020. And I do think part of the plan was that Sands of Time remake was going to be out by that point. Because remember, it was supposed to release and then got delayed very shortly before it was actually going to release, with Ubisoft now rebooting it. We'll talk about that as well in a moment. But I think the point was, with Sands of Time remake, if it did its thing, there would be a renewed interest in Prince of Persia again. And then you get this 2D game as sort of of a filler until probably the next remake. And so when that Sands of Time remake wasn't there, you just had a out of nowhere Metroidvania game. And admittedly, this game was also fighting an uphill battle. I remember when we all saw Lost Crown, we were like, nah, I don't know about this one, 2D Metroidvania, but it really scratched and clawed its way to critical success. And I think they should be proud of the sales that we're going to see here that seem really good for the game, and the scale and the scope and the lack of attention it really got and the lack of chances it got. So let's not delay any further. Let's get into that information here from Insider Gaming. As always, they have the scoop on Ubisoft, where they say Prince of Persia devs move to 3 new projects at Ubisoft. Insider Gaming understands that the decision to move on from Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown and a potential sequel was made around May of this year and was due to the game missing internal expectations. Sources say that Ubisoft was expecting The Lost Crown to sell similarly to the biggest Metroidvanias in the market, with millions of units sold in a relatively short space of time. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown has sold approximately 1 million units at the time of writing. Again, I don't think this is bad at all. This is great sales, I think. But here's the issue, is the biggest Metroidvanias on the market. Number one, this game I don't think got a ton of marketing. Number two, there wasn't a lot of faith in it. And number three, we're overestimating the Prince of Persia brand, because I feel like, and maybe people disagree with this, but I feel like it was the bridge to Assassin's Creed. A lot of people, I think, were ready to move on from Prince of Persia, as great as it was, because a lot of the ideas were then brought into Assassin's Creed and evolved upon and made much better in that stretch in the early Xbox 360 days. So it was like a clear step forward from where Prince of Persia was, where I don't know if many people were really missing it deeply, but definitely were in the mood for the idea of a remake. But when you see that they wanted this to be on the level of the biggest Metroidvanias on the market, I mean, you look at something like Metroid Dread, what a phenomenal game that was, a top 10 game of the year for me when it came out. But the reality is that barely got across the 3 million mark, and that's a Nintendo first-party IP. Metroid is widely known, and that is one of the biggest on the market, and it didn't go that far. And not everything can be a Hollow Knight, which just absolutely pops off, develops a massive cult following, and now I think Silksong is going to explode whenever that game finally releases. So I feel like Ubisoft set themselves up for failure with unrealistic expectations, and the problem with unrealistic expectations is you run into the problem that, say, Square Enix has many times, where they just expect the world out of these games, and when they don't meet that level of expectations, even if the game, like 1 million sales for a new Prince of Persia game in 2024, especially in a crowded start of the year window, is, I think, really good. But none of that is considered. None of us know the actual financials of Ubisoft, and if this was expected to sell 2 million copies or 3 million copies just because of the fact that they invested so much into it, or if this was just, hey, we're not seeing a level of popularity here, so therefore it's not worth investing in. But nonetheless, frustrating to see. And there's more to get into, as they say. As for which projects Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown developers have joined, it's understood that the majority have since moved on to 3 different projects. Most of the team has joined the development of Beyond Good and Evil 2, which was revived internally in 2017. Around a dozen employees have moved on to Project OVR, which is the next mainline Ghost Recon game. Around a dozen have also moved on to Project Steambot, a Rayman remake in development at Ubisoft Milan. Continuing on, they say Beyond Good and Evil 2 is a project still a few years away, with developers across the entire publisher confused as to why Ubisoft continues to invest tens of millions a year in development, which it never will likely get back. Project Steambot has also proved somewhat unpopular internally, as original creator Michel Ancel looms over the project as a consultant. Developers tell me that Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown was a perfect project. It was first pitched in June 2020 and saw a relatively straightforward development pipeline, a luxury that most development teams at Ubisoft don't have. Yet still, Ubisoft's ridiculously high internal expectations for such a project have once again prevented developers from exploring creative ideas. So I do think there is a good fit here, in that this Prince of Persia: Lost Crown team was the original Rayman Origins team, and so to see them go over to potentially a Rayman remake is pretty cool. I didn't expect any sort of Rayman remake, so I do find that personally exciting idea. I thought these types of games from Ubisoft were done. Beyond Good and Evil 2 being in development, I feel like it's sunk cost fallacy at its finest. At the same time, though, it's the game that just set a record for longest time in development, like over 16 years, right? At the same time, you spend 16 years on it, to cancel it now, it's like, what's the point? But tens of millions of dollars per year, that's a lot of money to be just blown away that Ubisoft could easily recoup. So I don't know if there's really a right decision on that game. I know a lot of people are like, well, cancel it. But at the same time, you've spent so long on it. You may as well, I guess, finish it out. But with all the projects Ubisoft has rushed out early, clearly buggy, clearly broken, clearly not good to go, I'm just surprised that this one, which has cost them so much, they just haven't eventually said, screw it, put it out there. I mean, they kind of had that energy with something like Skull and Bones. Like, okay, this has been in development for like 8 years. We just need to get our money back. We basically built the framework for an Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag remake. So, all right, just get it out there and recoup whatever we can on this. I'm surprised that Beyond Good and Evil 2 has been immune to that. And so that really leaves us with the next Ghost Recon game, which for me, Wildlands and whatever the sequel to it was called, I don't even remember at this point, were both games that I think if you're just into a open world co-op romp, cool, but they didn't really scratch the itch I was hoping they would, which is SOCOM. I really miss the SOCOM games, like the tactical awareness that you would have to have while you'd move around the environment and like the communication you'd have to have with your teammate. I remember as a kid having the PS2 headset and being able to like voice commands to my squad. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. So that game never really scratched that itch, and it's a very much like, I think me and Carrick, when we did Ham Radio podcast, used to call it Ghost Recon Boring Lands. It was just such a by the numbers open world game. So I'm not too excited in the next Ghost Recon game, unless it is a sequel to Ghost Recon Future Soldier. If it is that, I am all in. I loved that game. It was so good. Does anyone remember that game? I think that was just the presentation, the comms, the story. I'm going purely off of memory because I've only played it through once, but I remember in high school loving that game. I gotta give that one a replay. That one was so fun. Anyway, there's gonna be no movement on the Prince of Persia license until Sands of Time Remake, which earlier this year we got the report from Tom Henderson of Insider Gaming that the project had been rebooted completely at that point. So even that's a long ways off. And so again, I think it just compounds the idea that there is a lot of unfair pressure on Lost Crown to overperform way beyond anyone's wildest expectations. And also what a lot of game development companies aren't recognizing, in my opinion, this is purely anecdotal, but we're seeing so many games released on top of each other. There's a clear oversaturation issue in gaming where games are still selling well, like Silent Hill 2 sold 1 million copies. Metaphor sold 1 million copies in 24 hours. But I do wonder if these companies are looking at those numbers saying, hey, that's good, we sold 1 million, but what if we didn't release in such a crowded pocket like this October where you got a new Dragon Ball game, which sold 3 million copies in one day, and also a new Sonic game, and then a new Silent Hill game, etc., etc. Could we have got millions of more sales if we released in just a less crowded window where we didn't have to, I guess, force our consumers to make very tough choices? Because this is a luxury hobby. And not only that, but it's a time sink. And all of these games are so big and so demanding that once you commit to one, you're not going to be able to play all of them, even if you think all of them look really good. So that's the problem I think that publishers are finding themselves in, and each of them have convinced themselves time and time out that they are immune to the market. And I think this is a perfect example of that, because January into February, especially February, was very busy to open up 2024. And I don't know why a lot of these publishers continue to challenge fate, especially if your expectations are this Metroidvania will take over the market, even if there's no other Metroidvanias releasing nearby. Good games are good games, and people want to buy and play good games. If you're releasing near good games, there are ways you could avoid that and honestly probably make more money at the end of it, even if it involves putting more time into the game's development. Let's say like Prince of Persia got delayed into the summer. I wonder if that would have led to more sales, because in the summer, very little was dropping of major consequence. And it could have had more time to gather people, get those who are looking just for a new game to play to say, I'll try it out. Wasn't a full price game anyway. So rant over. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, the Prince of Persia Lost Crown game will not be getting a sequel. Its DLC is done, and so it'll go down in history as a really cool Ubisoft one-off. And if you haven't played it yet, I already have the review up on Retro Rebound, but I thought it was great. Go ahead and check that out. Definitely buy the game if you're looking for a good Metroidvania. But ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts down below on what's going on with Ubisoft. How are you feeling about their recent changes to the business? Let me know alongside these projects that have leaked through Insider Gaming, and I will talk to all of you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.